Welcome back to Rewind of the Living Dead. I am Damon Martin.
And here's Patrick Guerra. Da, 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 da. Da, 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 da.
I like the late. I should have thought of that when we did the intro. I should have thought of doing the full on late night intro. Yes, we are here tonight to talk about the very buzzy, very popular new horror film that lands on Shudder in a matter of days. It is available in theaters currently, called Late Night with the Devil.
Late Night with the Devil released in March of 2024, starring David Dastmalchian as Jack Delroy, Laura Gordon as June Ross Mitchell, Ian Bliss as Carmichael Haig, Faisal Bazi as Christo, and Ingrid Torelli as Lily. Of course, Damon, written and directed by Cameron and Colin Kearns. With an opening weekend box office of 2.8 million. Very famously, Damon, on Sunday night, they hit that gold number of $666,000 in their opening weekend, and it made the headlines everywhere, and everyone went nuts. And our audience has been going, where the hell is the review for Late Night with the Devil, Damon? It's here.
Yes, one of the buzziest films of the year, and when we started this stretch of where we had a lot of new horror films in a row with Immaculate and The First Omen, we had to squeeze this in here, and we thought, why not wait a little while to get to Late Night with the Devil? Not because we didn't want to review it, but because it is also dropping on Shudder. Hello, Shudder.
Oh, hi, Shudder.
In just a couple of days, and so we figured, why not sandwich between the two? So it's already in theaters right now. It will land on Shudder on Friday. Our episode usually drops Tuesday night going into Wednesday, so kind of perfect timing for Late Night with the Devil. So we kind of get the best of both worlds for the people who have already seen it in theaters and the people who are presumably about to watch it on Shudder in a few days. So that is where we are at with this new film, Late Night with the Devil. And so this is an interesting film because it just landed in theaters in March. It's just landing in Shudder in April, but this has actually been out there for a very long time.
Oh, Damon, some people have no idea how long this movie has been out there. I happen to know because I saw this movie well over 1 year ago. I went to the South by Southwest Film Festival last year. Had a blast, by the way. Ton of great horror movies. That's where I first saw Talk to Me. That's where I first saw an early screening of Evil Dead Rise, and many, many more horror movies, actually. It was a great year for horror movies in terms of going to that festival and seeing them. And one of them stuck out to me. Now, you got to pick and choose when you're at South by Southwest. You're not going to get to see every movie. The schedule is insane. I probably slept 3 or 4 hours a night on the good nights. And one of them had David Dastmalchian in it, and that immediately I had to zone in because David is a known horror fanatic. He is, I think, dyed-in-the-wool horror guy. He's also, by the way, just in every great movie you've ever seen. Let's say he had his feature film debut in The Dark Knight as one of the Joker's henchmen. He was in Prisoners. He's in the first Dune, many other movies. He's in Oppenheimer. All of these movies, by the way, getting Academy Awards. So, like David Dastmalchian, no small potatoes, but also a serious fan of horror. Now, you and I have covered the Fangoria Awards 3 years in a row, something like that.
Yeah.
And I think he's been the host at least twice. This guy is a horror guy, but he's also, he gets to dip his toe in both worlds where he's part of these great prestige, big studio movies. And I don't think I'd ever seen him in the leading role of something. So I'm at South by Southwest. I got to pick and I go, it's David Dastmalchian. There's no way I'm not going to miss this. And I saw Late Night with the Devil over 1 year ago, Damon. How about you?
So my experience with this movie dates back to last July, and that is at San Diego Comic-Con 2023, which is when you and I are pretty much the one time a year when we really get to hang out in person, is when I come out to San Diego for Comic-Con. And last year was a very odd year because it was in the middle of the actors and writers strikes, which meant there weren't a lot of panels. There wasn't a lot of promotion. It wasn't a typical San Diego Comic-Con, but there was one panel in particular that I had singled out on the calendar, on the schedule, that I wanted to go to, and it was a horror creators panel. Akilah Cooper, who famously wrote Megan and has done a lot of their horror movies, and they had, actual writers and directors on the panel. They just couldn't promote current work. or struck work, basically. So they were kind of talking in broad strokes and movies that weren't associated with the strikes, things like that. Because obviously we knew that at that point, some studios like A24 had been given permission to move forward with their productions because they had agreed to the terms with the actors and the writers, so on and so forth. So this panel was particularly interesting because it was a horror panel. It was a horror creators panel. So that was one of the only panels, not only one of the only panels I attended, but one of the only panels I was really excited about. So you and I attended that one last year, and they were talking about films that were coming up in 2023 and 2024. And one of the films that they mentioned was Late Night with the Devil. And if I remember correctly, they showed a little teaser, brief teaser on the video screen, and there was a couple of these movies. And I remember you leaning over and be like, I saw this at South by Southwest. I was like, oh, wow, already? Like, it's already done? And obviously, long and short of it is they didn't want to release it during the strikes because movies that were released during the strike you couldn't promote. This is a movie with a very small budget, done independently, and without the support of at least the one somewhat A-list actor they have in David Dastmalchian, they didn't have any other promotion, so they needed to wait until everything was cool and calmed down and everything was kind of back to normal in theatrical releases and production, or excuse me, in promotion. And so they waited until March of 2024 to release this. Otherwise, this film probably would have been out like last October around Halloween. It probably would have been a good timing to release this film. Instead, it was released now. So that was my first experience we were hearing about it. And at that time, everyone was talking about Late Night with the Devil, David Dastmalchian. Late Night with the Devil, David Dastmalchian. In my head at that point, I was like, it must be his movie. Like, he wrote it, he directed it, like it's his movie. Didn't find out till later it wasn't. But that was my initial introduction to this movie. And then a few months ago, I saw the trailer, and I was like, this seems interesting. I am kind of intrigued by this concept of a sort of found footage movie a little bit. And I know you're not a big found footage fan, but I think this is the kind of found footage that you would prefer, where it's not the shaky camera with the really, really dumb reasons to record things happening.
Oh, that's the worst reason.
But this one being basically a live production of a television show makes sense why they're recording everything. So I kind of enjoyed that. So it's kind of that's kind of the format of this movie. And the concept of basically at the initial time I'd heard about it, it almost sounded like they were going to conduct a live exorcism on television, is what I thought it was. That's not exactly what this is, but that's what I thought it was. And so buzz started picking up, and now here we are where this ends up being one of the most, at least to this point in the year, as of April 2024, one of the most talked about horror films of the year.
Yeah, I think super, super buzzy. And clearly them waiting helped it. I mean, it made almost $10 million dollars at the worldwide box office off of a $2.8 million, reported budget. So they're pretty happy, like sometimes things are going to get stuck on streaming and you don't know how your long, hard, probably 2, 3, 4 years worth of trying to make the movie actually land the plane that is the movie. And then the writer's strike happens and you go, oh, we should probably wait because we only have one guy to promote this really. And honestly, and I don't know about you, I wouldn't listen to some David Dastmalchian, interviews, and the guy is so charismatic and interesting and genuine, and he's like fun to listen to. And you can tell he's super passionate about the genre. And so it was a smart move on their part because basically he just he kicked up the fervor and everybody bought in. I remember when the trailer dropped and I was like, oh, finally it's coming out. Finally, I'd been sitting on it for a year. I hadn't said much about it for an entire year. And boy, the response was super big because I think the horror community, which is a very tight-knit community, absolutely loves David. And he returns the favor. He's very good to us, and he's out there pounding the pavement. I'll give you a little bit of inside baseball. Damon Martin was trying to hunt him down for our podcast, and I think we'll still try to get him on and maybe just talk horror with him because he's the kind of guy who wants to sit and talk horror anyway. So at some point down the line, expect David Dastmalchian on this podcast. That's going to happen. We weren't able to get him for Late Night with the Devil. I think he's busy shooting. It seemed, it's our complete guess, I think he's shooting What We Do in the Shadows out in Toronto. So I think he's busy. and he can't get to a lot of promotion right now. But Damon, the good damage is done because I think this movie has a ton of popularity.
Absolutely. And just to kind of give you a sense of what this movie is about, the non spoiler version. Basically, this movie takes place in 1977, which I read an interesting interview with Cameron and Colin Carnes where they talked about how they came up with the date of this movie. They were trying to figure out if they were going to base this movie in the 70s or 80s, because that was really the heyday of late night television with Johnny Carson, and then David Letterman came along, and it was like really this like boom of late night television. And they were trying to figure out, so they wanted it to be during a time during Sweeps Week, which, if you know what that means, that's basically the time of the year when ratings matter the most. Television networks are trying to get the biggest ratings possible for advertisers. That is like a huge time for them. It's not as prevalent now because of streaming and everything, but before the streaming era, Sweeps Week was the end all be all for television. That's when you needed. That's when you would watch, like, if people remember Dallas, the old show, the old late night, or the soap show Dallas, Who Shot JR? Everyone remembers that. Like, even if you don't know what the show is, you've probably heard that phrase in your lifetime. That kind of stuff would happen during Sweeps Week because, they would reveal Laura Palmer's killer on Twin Peaks during Sweeps Week. They wanted you to tune in. They wanted to guarantee you were going to tune in during this particular block of programming. So they knew they wanted this show to air on Halloween night, and they had to pick a time when it would fit into that schedule. And ironically enough, Halloween 1977 fell on a Monday. It was perfect timing. So that's why Late Night with the Devil is based in 1977, because it fit with the narrative of them doing this show on Halloween nights, and it worked on a Monday night of what would have been Sweeps Week. So that's why this film was based in 1977. The story is 1977, there's a show called Night Owls with a host named Jack Delroy, played by David Dastmalchian. And at the time, when he comes up, he starts to become a pretty popular late night talk show host, and he's actually rivaling the Late Show with Johnny Carson, getting ratings close to and, kind of basically, making Johnny sweat a little bit. But then over time, the audience starts tuning out, people start losing interest, and he starts kind of doing stunt programming to try to bring people back. Almost a 1970s version of Jerry Springer. Controversial guests, controversial topics, people hitting each other with chairs, whatever the case may be. Whatever they can do to drum up ratings is basically this point. And so by 1977, they're in the thick of this, and they're getting to a real critical point of this show where it's basically do or die. And so they pitched the idea of basically doing a supernatural show on Halloween night featuring all of these supernatural guests. They feature a psychic or a medium to come on the show. They feature a skeptic who used to be a psychic or claimed to be a psychic and a hypnotist. He's now dispelling these. He's basically what's the word I'm looking for, Patrick? He's basically
he's dispelling. He's
disproving these people. He's a skeptic, and he's basically disproving these people. And then they feature a guest of a little girl who survived more or less a Branch Davidian cult, this satanic cult that more or less drank the Jim Jones Kool-Aid. They all killed themselves in the house, but she survived. And since that time, she's basically been raised by her psychologist who is trying to help her through the trauma of this. And she has these episodes where she's almost like possessed by a spirit of something that happened in this house, this cult that they're dealing with. And so these are the guests on this show, over this hour-long show. And you can imagine by the trailer and by what I said in the intro, things go haywire is the best way to describe it. And that is the basic plot of Late Night with the Devil.
You're kidding, Damon. They don't just have like a regular show and things just don't go totally as planned. Yeah, no, I mean, shit hits the fan. I mean, that's what you show up for. And it was very promising to me when I saw fan excitement from younger generations, because let's be honest, Damon, we're not the youngest podcasters of the group, but a lot of horror content creators were very excited for this movie, probably because of David Dastmalchian, let's be honest. But like, you and I grew up on late night talk shows for sure. I mean, I know I did. In my household, they watched Johnny Carson, and then I tried to stay up late and watch David Letterman. David Letterman was my guy. So I already had sort of an idea in my head of what the late night world was like, and it's still out there, but it doesn't have the popularity that it had during that time. And so that was intriguing, and it was interesting to see that that younger audiences who probably didn't grow up on late night TV, like latched onto the premise, because I was like, oh, that's pretty narrow cast. Like, it's a very specific type of thing we're talking about here, and it's from a bygone era, and yet people still wanted to check it out. Damon, maybe I should give a little background on the Caron brothers. I never knew them before. Did you?
I knew of 100 Bloody Acres. I knew that name. I knew of that movie, but I can't say that I've seen it. But I did know of that movie. When I looked them up and saw they did 100 Bloody Acres, I was like, okay, I've heard of that. I've not seen it, but I've heard of it.
Yeah, they directed a lot of TV series over the years, really for since the early '90s. Under One Roof, Warren and Hal, Fancy Boy, True Story with Hamish and Andy, How to Stay Married. These are things I've never heard of. Beggar's Belief was one of their short films, Celestial Avenue, and 100 Bloody Acres. Had you seen 100 Bloody Acres?
No, as I said, I've heard of it. I haven't seen it.
Yeah. I'd never heard of that. And I'd never heard of Scare Campaign, which was what they did right before this. But then there was a big gap, a pretty significant gap of about, I would say, 7 years between Scare Campaign and Late Night with the Devil. I don't know these guys. They seem like they might even be a little older than us, actually, which makes sense. I think they're really keyed in when you watch the movie. I think the attention to detail from that era definitely helps being that age. I knew zero about these guys when I watched it at South by Southwest, and I was like, if these are guys younger than me, they did their fucking research, because the shit really feels like a 1970s television program. Like the details were very, very good. Now, I'm sure, of course, they did do plenty of research, but it does show in Late Night with the Devil. It feels like you are transported back to that era.
Yeah, that's one compliment we also paid to The First Omen, and I said that sometimes it's difficult for films that base themselves in different eras to actually make it feel genuine, like you are actually in that era, because we are in a world now where technology is so much greater, it's hard to escape that, even the look and the feel of it. And I complimented Arkasha Stevenson for the direction in The First Omen, because it really did look and feel like a movie that took place in the early 70s. This film also gets that aesthetic pretty dead on. Late Night with the Devil, whether we're talking about the grainier film that they're shooting on or the behind the scenes footage shot in some black and white images, things like that, this looks like a film that was basically shot in 1977, and we're just now discovering this footage in 2024. And I think that feels pretty authentic to what it is. They tried to keep it as genuine as they could, and it looks like that. And to your point about the Caron brothers, I don't know their ages. I do know they are older than us, but they did say they grew up in the 70s and 80s. So I would imagine, they were familiar with that Johnny Carson era, and that's kind of what got them interested in doing this, because that was the time when, even though the Tonight Show was not filmed live, but like live television would happen, and there would always be something go haywire, whether lights would go out or they would invite in, like they had notoriously always invited in like the zookeeper to bring animals, and the animals would go haywire. The bird would fly off, or the snake would wrap itself around someone that shouldn't wrap itself, whatever. Something weird would always happen on these live television broadcasts that would go haywire, and that was kind of the charm of that that live, unscripted television feel. And late night television featured a lot of that, because they would have comedians on, they would have magicians on, they would have psychics on, like they would do a lot of stuff that you don't really see these days, like Jimmy Fallon, Stephen Colbert. They don't really do that. Now it's like actor, musical guest, actor, comedian, actor, musician, that's the pretty standard format. Or maybe you have like a politician on or something like that. They're not doing a lot of gimmick stuff. And if they are, it's with an actor doing the gimmick stuff, like doing a karaoke thing or something stupid like that. Back in those days, they did have these like really elaborate guests and weird, magicians and things like that. And so that's kind of what they based this upon. And so it does feel authentic aesthetically, and the feel of the film really does feel of that era.
Damon, it just occurred to me. I'm going to toss this out to you and see if you have an answer, because I definitely have one. What's your favorite late night moment that's gone wrong?
Ooh, late night moment that's gone wrong. I don't know if I do have an answer to that.
Because I got one, and it connects to horror too. So I'm just curious.
Yeah, I don't know that I had one. So I didn't watch a lot. My late night television when I was a kid was Arsenio Hall.
Yeah, me
That
too.
was my late night television. He was like the hip young guy, and I always felt like Johnny Carson and even David Letterman to a certain extent were like the old dudes. So like Arsenio with the the woo 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 woo. Like that was
I watched every episode of
yeah,
Arsenio
that
Hall.
was that was my late night, but I can't really remember like any instance where I was like shocked of like a live thing gone wrong. I always remember Jerry Springer shows because Jerry
That was
Springer
daytime
was the
TV.
that was, but Jerry Springer was the former mayor of Cincinnati, which is my hometown, and he got busted because he wrote a check to a prostitute, and that's how he got busted, and he ends up leaving office. Of course, Jerry Springer is no longer with us, but I always remember Jerry Springer because of his connection to my hometown. So no, I can't really think of one on live television that's just really gone haywire. What you have one though?
My favorite of all time that came to mind while you were going down memory lane with kind of the stunts. David Letterman, world famous for actually he even had a segment called Stupid Human Tricks where he'd bring people in that did dumb shit. But that wasn't this instance. In this instance, David Letterman brought on horror royalty, Damon, Drew Barrymore from the original Scream. Do you remember Drew Barrymore's 1990 something appearance when she comes on with the pixie short hair?
I do not.
Oh my God, this is world famous. I can't believe you don't know this one. She came on, and listen, Drew has her history with substances. I'm not going to say that she was on something or not, but she might tell you. She's a very open book. She came on and she was having a blast. She came out dancing, twirling around. She jumped up on David's desk and flashed him in front of the live studio audience. And I mean, I was watching live that night. She gave him the full show, and then she sat down and proceeded to flirt with him for the next 15 or 20 minutes, however long that segment was. And Dave was just, it was like someone had just dumped a bucket of ice water on him. He had absolutely no idea what to do. But that's one of my favorite ones. And it involves Drew Barrymore from Scream. I mean, come on. I don't think she was promoting Scream. I don't think it was that far into the 90s, but it was a memorable one. And that's what was fun about late night is like anything could happen. And in that instance, something did happen.
Yeah, I can't believe I've never heard of that. That's interesting. Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, David Letterman was like the second punk rocker. Like he was not quite as punk rock as Arsenio Hall, but I do remember he had more like I always remember Johnny Carson and by extension Jay Leno were like the old dudes. And
Yeah,
then
like traditional middle America late night.
yeah, and then Letterman was a little more punk rock, and then Arsenio Hall was like hip hop punk rock. Like he was like full on, So
Yeah, it was
yeah,
a party on Arsenio. Yeah.
I don't remember that. I feel like I have to look up that clip now because everything's on the internet now. I'm sure it's out there somewhere.
Yeah, no, I was a big Letterman guy. I watched him all throughout the years, and he had great musical guests on too. I think he picked really good music. And Late Night with the Devil, staying on topic, sorta, kind of almost reminds me more of like Conan O'Brien. I don't know how much Conan O'Brien you watched over the years, but he was really out there. Like to
Yeah,
me, the glimpses that I would see in Late Night with the Devil, where they did kind of a retrospect on Jack Delroy's show, reminded me a lot of like the old Johnny Carson skits, and B, the Conan O'Brien kind of wackiness of it all.
Conan's probably one of the only late night TV shows since Arsenio, and that was in like the early '90s when I was a kid. Conan O'Brien's probably the only one I really sought out in more recent years when he had a show because he was funny. I actually found his comedy pretty hilarious and his interviews were always really good. So I did enjoy Conan. So I will say that's probably the one late night talk show host of a modern era that I enjoyed. I did watch some interviews with James Corden because he had some funny segments. Like he did, I remember he did one where he took the Avengers on like a bus tour around LA, which was really funny. I remember watching that. But like, yeah, I just, again, I'm not a big late night talk show guy. So I'm like, I have like a very fringe relationship to all these shows. And which is weird though, because when you talk about like what this film is really based on, it is a film about a television show. Like it is a film about late night television, and I'll be the first to admit when it comes to like I don't even know if this is really a genre necessarily, but one of my favorite kinds of films and or TV shows are films and or TV shows about the film and TV industry. I've said this many times on the show. I think it's been well documented. I'm a massive Quentin Tarantino fan, and I love all of his movies. And forever and always, you would probably hear me say Pulp Fiction is probably my favorite all-time movie, and it's my favorite Quentin Tarantino movie. In more recent years, though, I think in my head, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood has usurped that top spot, not only because I love it, but because it is a movie about making movies. I just have a weird fascination. I think it's because I've always loved movies. Like, I wanted to be a screenwriter my whole life. I wanted to go to film school at USC. I just love the film industry. So, like, anytime you can kind of go, like, behind the scenes look, even though we know it's not reality, but, like, that dramatic look at making a movie or making a TV show, seeing how the pasta is made, so to speak, always intrigued me. And another show that I absolutely adored, which will probably turn every conservative that listens to our show off, but I absolutely love The Newsroom on HBO, the show with Jeff Daniels, created by Aaron Sorkin. That ran for 3 seasons. That was about the making of a news program. And I really enjoyed that because it was just fun to see how it all worked. And again, I know it's drama. I know it's not actually what happens, but I'm just fascinated by that. So I think going into this, I already had a little bit of like a piqued interest in Late Night with the Devil, just because this is essentially almost like a documentary style film about this episode of TV that just went horribly wrong.
That's an interesting thing you bring up there. Like, what exactly is this movie genre wise? Now, it's been pitched like sort of found footage. You even said in the intro, like, it's kind of found footage. Like, without any spoilers or anything, it's just they do kind of get into the history of Jack Del Roy in almost like a documentary style, like it's a retrospect. And then they go into the footage as it runs. And then, and we'll get deeper into this in a little bit, the camera becomes decidedly subjective. This is a movie that's genre is hard to define. Like, for good or for bad, Damon, I don't know how to tell people this is the movie, this is the type of movie you're getting into. It's pretty unique in that respect. Like, even the footage aspect of it doesn't feel like footage because it's showing you a produced show. And it's not really a movie about making a show. It's just a movie that is showing you a show being made. Like, because like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, a great example of about making movies, about being an actor, about being an artist and all that stuff. By the way, a lot of movies are just filmmakers talking about being filmmakers, like even in metaphors or whatever. So it's a very common thing to do. What the hell is Late Night with the Devil actually? Like, when I tell people like, hey, go check this out, what are they checking out? What are they in for?
Well, and I think that's part of my attraction to this movie is that it doesn't fall into any one category. You can say it's sort of a possession film because there are elements of that in this movie, which again, that's in the trailer where you can see there's almost like, again, I thought it was a live exorcism being conducted on television based on the trailer. That's what I thought it was. And then it's not exactly that. There is elements of possession in this movie, but that's what I thought it was. Like, we're conducting an exorcism on live television. That's what we're recording, and that's what we're going to show you. And I was like, okay, that's kind of interesting. But it's not that. And so it is a little bit of a possession movie, but it is also satire in a way of, you know, the idea of, you know, how far will you go to find success? There is that analogy in there, and I think there is a real element of that in here, and you can find that across a lot of movies, not just in horror, like just in general, of like how far will people go to find success, or how far are you willing to go to be successful? And then like the horror elements of this, it's interesting because the idea, basically, this is a movie that escalates over time. The film opens, as you mentioned, with a documentary style, like, who is Jack Del Roy? Why do we care about him? And what is this that he does? And I really enjoyed that because it felt genuine. It felt like this is something you would see in like a documentary about this guy's life. Like it felt very like Access Hollywood or
Yeah.
True Hollywood Stories. I really enjoyed
Yes.
that opening. And it's just that. It is exactly that. Like Jack Delroy was born in 1945 in a small town, blah, blah, blah. And by 1971, he was one of the most successful late night television hosts in America. That whole thing. And then you learn about his wife and his success and then and so when you lead into the show, basically what they're telling you is this was a show that was filmed live on Halloween night in 1977, and outside of the people who are watching it live on television that night, it has never been seen since then because of the events that unfolded. And now they're putting it out there for us to see, along with some behind the scenes footage that was shot that night, which, to be fair, and again, this kind of goes to the found footage aspect, it actually does happen. Like if you actually see how behind the curtain, because I've been like I used to work for Fox. Like I went behind. I was at my day job covering mixed martial arts. I went to a filming of a show that was on called UFC Tonight. That was their show that filmed on Fox Studios lot, and I was there for a filming of the show. And when I was there, of course, you had the big cameras, you had the giant cranes and everything, but there was somebody behind me the entire time filming stuff behind me the entire time. They filming like a behind-the-scenes thing, and there were cutaways where you'd see people back there like on the computers, like in the control room and things like that. So that part of it felt genuine. Now, yes, they are capturing conversations that are kind of private, and would they really record this? I understand that. But the reality is these things do get filmed. Like if you go to the Tonight Show, there's going to be a blogger or an online person who goes around to the green rooms, goes backstage, films the celebrities getting ready, like coming out, they film walking out, all these kind of things. That actually does happen. So you're kind of getting the hour-long broadcast of Night Owls from Halloween night 1977 interlaced, intercut with these small, and again, to be fair, these behind-the-scenes segments are small. They're 2-3 minutes at a time. It's not like 5 minutes of live television and 30 minutes of behind the scenes. It's like this is more or less the hour-long episode of Night Owls from 1977 with like 2 and 3 minute segments of behind, basically commercial breaks. It's
commercial breaks.
All of the behind the scenes footage are the commercial breaks, more or less, and that's what we're getting here.
It's a really interestingly put together movie. It's like I almost want to call it like mixed genre, which I don't know if we get a ton of that in horror. You kind of have to define yourself. Like it's usually almost always like either horror drama or horror comedy or horror sci-fi. Like, it's usually that. This is like horror, doc, drama, comedy. It kind of mixes them all. And then it mixes like how you capture them. It mixes like docu style. It mixes found footage. It mixes what I would argue is I know that behind the scenes stuff is common, but those are almost subjective moments. The discussions that are going on very much like push the plot forward. It's almost like you could just jump out of the found footage and into a regular movie in those moments. That's kind of how those moments almost feel. So it's a really unique movie that way, which I think is cool for the audiences because, sometimes you go like, hey, we just did back-to-back nun horror movies that are almost identical. And then now we're talking about Late Night with the Devil, which I am struggling to even try to define what genre it fits into. It sort of covers all the bases in one movie.
I'm sure you've heard the recent news that Blumhouse has teamed with Lionsgate and they're going to be doing a reboot of the Blair Witch Project. And even though I know the Blair Witch Project was not the first ever found footage movie, people are going to start screaming at me about Cannibal Holocaust. I understand. But the film that really exploded found footage was the Blair Witch Project. And when the Blair Witch Project came out in 1999, everybody tried to duplicate that in one form or fashion. And the majority failed. Like the majority could not capture the spirit and the originality of the Blair Witch Project because they were basically trying to cash in on a cheap, easy way to make a horror film that didn't really require you to have a budget, a big named actor. You didn't have to go to film school. Like this was all like, you could do this on your own and with your friends and you could somehow make a successful film. It was like Kevin Smith when he made Clerks for $28,000, basically putting everything on credit cards And then that exploded his career. A lot of people try to do that. Now, can you find success doing that? Sure, but you got to understand it's few and far between. What I appreciated about Late Night with the Devil is it's kind of like the Blair Witch Project. It's something I'd never seen before. It's a genre that doesn't really define itself. As I said, it's a documentary, it's a found footage movie, it is a possession film. It is a lot of different things kind of sandwiched into one film. And then, as I said, biasly, I fully admit I'm biased, it is a movie about the TV industry. It's not about how to make TV, but it's just a movie behind the scenes, how the pasta, how the sausage gets made. And I love those. I'm walking into a movie or TV show already at like a C. Like, I'm not even going in like open-minded. I'm already like, all right, you already got me at a C. Just get me to an A. You don't need to get me like, I'm not starting like with an open mind where it could be an F. I'm probably already starting to C because I love this genre of production. But this one is, even if you don't love this movie, and I'm not telling everyone you should love this movie, I do, and we will get into more and more why I love this movie. But a big part of my love for this movie is the originality.
Yeah, there's one thing I can say about this movie, Damon. It's like highly, highly original. I saw a lot of movies at South by Southwest that fateful year ago. None of them, not one, came anywhere close to being as original as Late Night with the Devil. Again, for better or for worse, Late Night with the Devil is as original a movie that you will probably see this year. I mean, we do have some pretty interesting movies coming up. Like, I think Longlegs and Cuckoo, to me, seem like they might be trippy genre benders. We don't know what to expect from those movies. But I fail to see a movie that could kind of basically kitchen sink the whole damn horror genre in one movie.
Yeah. And this film, again, it's filled with a lot of different things. You got to look at, again, the aesthetics of it. It looks really well done. One thing I really enjoyed about this movie were the colorful characters that are in this movie. Jack Delroy, David Dastmalchian, to his credit, or to his credit in this film, he's always been more of a character actor. He's the guy you know. He is the Joker's henchman. He is Bierman from The Scientist in Oppenheimer. He's not, J. Robert Oppenheimer. He is not, Cillian Murphy. He's in Boogeyman. He actually has a strong role. When we reviewed Boogeyman, that film is flawed in so many ways, but David Dastmalchian's brief appearance in that movie is one of the highlights of that movie. He's in it, gone within, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, however long he's in that movie. He's a highlight. But again, he's that kind of, I know that guy, where do I know that guy from? And David, to his credit, not that like I'm buddies with him, I could just hang out and call him Dave or anything, but like, to his credit, he does have a very distinct look to him, so you do recognize him pretty easily. When I saw him in Dune, even though he had a much different look in that movie because he plays one of the Harkonnen family, which they all have like that faded, super white, pale skin, and bald and all that kind of stuff, things like that. I recognize him immediately. I just know he has a very distinct face. But this is David Dastmalchian in a leading role. And what this film showed me right away, Patrick, was they need to give him more leading roles. Like, he does not need to be the side character. I'm not saying that, like, maybe he doesn't want to play those side characters. I'm saying, like, people need to put him in more leading roles because he really does lead this film and does an incredible job at it.
It's entirely possible, Damon. We'll be talking about that shortly, won't we?
Yes, that's also true.
Stay tuned, folks. After this break, we may be talking about David Dastmalchian's performance.
Yes, but I think overall, again, what I loved about this movie, without getting too deep into plot and spoilers, is that it feels authentically, aesthetically like a 1970s production, which again I've said before and I'll say it again, is really, really hard to do. You and I have reviewed this show on the air. I love Stranger Things. I've been a devout Stranger Things fan the entire time. But if I had one small complaint about Stranger Things, it takes place in the 80s, but it doesn't look like you filmed it in the 80s. Now, I'm not saying they're trying to make it film like it's in the 80s. I'm just saying it looks like it's the 80s. They do right with the hairstyles, the clothing, the toys, all that kind of stuff. But it looks HD. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying they're not trying to tell you that this came out in 1984 or whatever.
Yeah.
When you try to tell me a movie came out in 1984, it better damn well look like it came out in 1984. And by and large, that does not work very often these days. The First Omen accomplished it, and I think Late Night with the Devil accomplished that. But also, and I don't want to keep repeating myself, what I think I loved most about this movie was the originality. I can't define this movie as one thing. I can't sit here and say, like I did, and I'm not knocking First Omen and Immaculate by any stretch of the imagination. If you go back and listen to those reviews, I like both those movies. But those are religious horror films. I could tell you that's a religious horror film. It's not a bad thing. I'm just saying, like, that's like me saying Nightmare on Elm Street or Scream or I'm wearing a Halloween t-shirt. That's a slasher. I know what it is.
Right.
Like, I'm not knocking it. I'm just saying that's the genre. I can't tell you exactly what the genre is, and I appreciate that. Even a film that we loved last year, our shared favorite horror film last year, Talk to Me, which was wildly original, unlike anything we had seen in the possession genre, it was still a possession film. Mm-hmm. Totally different than totally different than any other possession film you've probably ever seen before, but it was still a possession film. I can't say that with Late Night with the Devil. This is a film that defies logic and labels, and I think that's a rare feat in filmmaking, not just horror.
No, it's very tough to do. And excuse me, I think that's the advantage in horror, is that you are often allowed to meld genres, whereas so many other in big studios, maybe even something like not A24. They're actually pretty good at genre bending. But studios, they need to be able to sell this as a horror movie, an action movie, a drama, or a comedy, or a sci-fi. Like, you have to be very clear about that. I'm telling you, Late Night with the Devil's all those things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we got to get into spoilers.
Let's do it.
Deeper into the story, and then obviously get into categories. So if you haven't seen it, Late Night with the Devil, it is still in theaters. I know they were still having showings at my theater as of this past weekend, but it shows up on Shudder on Friday, and you can stream it on there as well. Now, I will say this, as a devout theater goer, I always recommend going to see films in the theater. I certainly understand the convenience, and I appreciate that a service like Shudder exists. But if you can, go see this in the theater. I did really appreciate this as a theater-going experience. When I saw it, it was a Saturday night at like 10 p.m. And my theater, it was a small theater, like a little 30-seat theater, but there was still like 20 people in there. It was pretty crowded for a Friday or for a Saturday night. But if you can, and it's still out there, go see it. But it is going to be available on Shudder in a matter of days, and you can stream it on there. Let's get into spoilers, Patrick, because I know we divulge, we kind of divert in terms of directions of how we feel about this movie. I'll put it out there right now that we're in spoilers, because if you're listening to this section, you've seen it. I'll just go ahead and say it right now. I think Late Night with the Devil, to this point, as of, April 2024, which is 4 months in the year, which really means nothing. That's not even a small fraction of the year. This is my favorite horror movie of the year so far. Its originality, I adore. Performances, I adore. And I just think the uniqueness of attacking a horror story of this level, where it's basically a late night television show trying to game up ratings, which, coming from a website world where it's all about clicks and page views, I understand that need, that desire. It's like when not to get too far into my own day job, it's like, I cover combat sports for a living. When Jake Paul, the social influencer, started fighting, a lot of old school journalists like myself are like, this is a joke. Like, this dude's a freaking YouTuber. Like, why do we care? Guess what? A whole lot of people did care, and now he's like one of the biggest draws in combat sports. Whether I agree with it or not, whether I care or not, whether I like it or not, we cover it because people care. And so I understand I come from that world. So I understand the idea of doing whatever you have to do to drum up ratings. And this show, it's almost like it is very much it is very much like a talk show, which it is, but I'm saying it is set up like a talk show where it starts out almost like the fun. They bring in this psychic named Christu, who is a medium, and he comes in and he's not that bright. You can kind of tell he's not really that great at his job. He doesn't get things right away, but then he starts to kind of get things right a little bit. And then he eventually falls into a real vision where he starts saying names and things he's feeling. And, You can kind of tell it kind of freaks Jack out a little bit when these start happening, but then he falls ill and he ends up more or less vomiting on live air. This black goo just comes pouring out of him, and they have to take him to the hospital. We find out later on he died at the hospital. What the fuck? And then they bring out a guy named Carl Michael Haig, who was the psychic and a guy who basically was Christou before Christou, but now he is the other side. He has become a skeptic. If you've seen the movie Now You See Me, the magician movie, he is the Morgan Freeman character. He is the guy who goes out there and disproves, here's the rabbit in the hat. No, the rabbit didn't really go in the hat. There's a bottom that fell out and blah, blah. He's the one who just tells you how the magic works. And he's the one who disproves all these people. And he has a gimmick where he says, if you can prove me wrong, if you can prove that you can really read minds or, conjure the dead, whatever it is you can do, I got a $500,000 check with your name on it. I will give you $500,000 if you could prove to me that you're real, that your abilities are real. And so he's the skeptic. And then they bring out Lily with her therapist, who is the woman who's kind of raised this girl after she was rescued from the satanic cult, the old suicide cult. They killed themselves. She was the one survivor. And they've been working together for years. But this girl is also almost like a split personality, because she does kind of get possessed by this demon, this worship demon that her cult raised. That's who they raised her to believe in. And now she's kind of got in tune with this spirit. Of course, Carmichael thinks it's all bullshit. And so watching this all unravel until it actually becomes real at the very end of the movie, I thought it was a really cool experiment, because in my daily life, Patrick, I'm Carmichael. I'm skeptic. So watching him disprove over and over again all this bullshit, I was like, I love this. They're not trying to tell you it's real. They're having this guy on the show telling you it's all BS. And then, of course, at the end, you find out there actually is a demon. It is possessing this little girl, and all this kind of things going haywire. But up to that point, that's probably one of my favorite aspects of this movie, is that Carmichael Haig is on the show basically saying, this is all horse shit. Like, stop believing in bullshit. And also, let's be clear, this is 1977. They didn't have the internet to look up things. This is back when, it was easier to believe psychics and possessions and exorcisms were real, because you really had no way to disprove it at that point. You just saw it in the newspaper. You saw it on a TV show. Famously, the Ed and Lorraine Warren, I think they did Donahue, or they did talk shows back in the day where they talked about these possession stories like it's just factual, like it just happened.
What's interesting, Damon, is you kind of, I wouldn't say, well, you did. You glossed over the actual beginning of the movie, which is, we touched on it a little bit in the non-spoiler section. It is the sort of true Hollywood story run-up. I had forgotten. I went to go see this again because there's no way I could comment on this from over a year ago, having seen it. So I went and saw it in the theater again before we did this podcast. I forgot just how extensive that opening sequence is. It's about a 10-minute, maybe even a little longer opening sequence, and it's actually very key to the all-important dread in this movie. If there had just been a crawl or a graphic up front that just said what you're about to see is the final blah 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 of the Night Owl show starring Jack Delroy, watch at your own caution or whatever, it didn't do that. It spent 10 minutes telling us the history of Jack Delroy, and there's a very important part of that, which is his wife. He finds out the love of his life is sick with cancer. But they also dig into the fact that his ratings are plummeting, which you mentioned. And then they also mention that Jack Delroy was a known, how would you put it, commiserator at Bohemian Grove, which, if you're a conspiracy theorist or you believe that Bohemian Grove is a real place where the elite go to hang out on the weekends. And that's where it's believed they go to divvy up power. And some people will tell you that they even go there to take part in satanic rituals that allow them to hold on to power. Now, it's interesting that Jack Delroy, which is basically a C-level late night host, goes there to gain power. But it's important. It's important to note that he does go to Bohemian Grove. He does have this wife who's dying, and he is absolutely on the razor's edge of having his show canceled. So that's kind of in the back of your mind the whole time the show's going on. You're going, Jack's a desperate man right now. He's already lost his wife by the time that the final show has aired. So when Chris Dew is doing his mind reading and he's like, I hear the name, so I forget what he says, so and so, like Minnie. Yeah, I hear Minnie. They cut to Jack. One of the other cameras cuts to Jack's face, and he's looking very worried. Well, you wouldn't know what to think about that if that little intro hadn't been in there, where you go, is that something tied to Bohemian Grove? Is that something tied to his wife? Is that something tied to what he's been up to before this? So you get the impression that maybe Jack Delroy has sold his soul to have the greatest night in television. But of course, what do you do when you make a deal with, what happens when you make a deal with the devil? Shit goes wrong, right? He may have the best ratings that they've ever had. And indeed, during those commercial breaks, the camera kind of starts to follow him backstage, and he's talking to his chain smoking producer. And the producer's like, oh, our ratings are through the roof, Jack. This is going to put us back on the map. You're back, baby. All that stuff. It doesn't feel like a victory. It feels like we are careening towards something bad actually happening. So it's really important, that documentary part, but it strikes me funny, Damon, because I mean, we don't even have to spoil the ending of this movie for people to know it's going to go very south. It's going to absolutely careen into utter chaos and madness. We'll get to a little bit of that in categories, but I found it very frustrating that we started the movie with a very clear and present documentary that then at the end of that 10 minutes says, now here is the final, uncut tape from the final night of Night Owl with Jack Delroy. The whole movie happens from that point on, basically run as the TV show with the little cut-ins, and the chaos ensues, and it careens off the cliff to its exciting conclusion. And we never come back to that documentary. Like, it never existed. And I was like, why? Like, why aren't there bookends? Like, they sort of do that in Blair Witch, like they start by explaining to you what you're about to see, but then they sort of let the footage speak for itself. This was different. This was an overt, like, here is the story. We're about to show you the footage. And then they never come back to that at all, ever again. They leave it almost like, it's like they did two different movies. And that's why I said earlier, very cryptically, for good or for bad, because they sort of abandoned that particular part of their structure. And I found that frustrating.
So I understand where you're going. I understand that if you bookend it and you get like an actual conclusion with the documentary where they come back in and they say afterwards, Jack Delroy was, sentenced to life in prison or whatever actually happens, and that was the end of his story. I get it. I understand where you're coming from. I do. But the ending of this movie, and again, we're in spoilers, so, be warned. The ending in this movie is that, we learned that Lily, the little girl, really did have this connection to this demon called Abraxas. And Abraxas was also happened to be the demon that they were more or less worshiping at the Grove. And that was basically who Jack Delroy sold his soul to say, hey, I want ratings. I need help. I'll give you whatever you want, Mr. Abraxas, and give me my ratings. And so it's just the old school tale of the devil that you don't, what he giveth, he taketh away, which is he giveth you your ratings, he takes away his wife. He gives his wife cancer. That's what we're made to believe, that this demon gave his wife cancer as like a punishment or like an equal, you'll get your career, but you're going to lose something in return, and that's your wife. And so at the end, we learned that Lily is possessed by Abraxas, but Abraxas, because during her possession, when she actually is possessed by this demon, she full on just talks to Jack. Like they know each other. He doesn't realize it at first, but he's like, eventually gets around to it. And he's like, oh shit. Like, this is that same demon that I more or less prayed to at the Grove, that they said, hey, if you do this, this demon will grant your greatest wishes. without, necessarily. And it's intimated that he basically, like, the demon told him, you're going to have to sacrifice something. Didn't say what, didn't say, your wife's going to get cancer and die horribly, but he's like, you're going to have to sacrifice something. But he doesn't care. I just want success. I want my ratings back. I want to beat Johnny Carson. He doesn't give a fuck. Give me. I'll take it. His wife dies, but his ratings start, then things start turning around after his wife dies. That's when they actually explain that in the documentary section, where they say that after his wife died, the sympathy for Jack kind of exploded and his ratings started to kind of tick up again and people started to care about him. He kind of became this sympathetic figure. And then, things started to work out. But when he realizes that that's this demon, and then it's like, oh shit. And then the demon splits open Lily and kills everyone in the studio, kills the guests, kills everyone. And then Jack goes into this like dreamlike state. And this again is where you're talking about it defies genre, because if this was actually just the TV show, we wouldn't see this. I understand the frustration with that, but
what is this now?
Yeah. So you kind of go in this dreamlike sequence where he's visited by his dead wife, and you realize that like he basically sacrificed her for his career, is more or less what we're told. And she's like, I'm suffering, put me out of my suffering. I need to, you're basically, I'm dying forever with this cancer. And so he grabs this dagger and plunges it into his wife's heart to put her out of her misery. But then as he wakes up in the studio, he has stabbed and killed Lily, and all the guests are dead, and you hear police sirens in the background, and they're coming for Jack. His career is done. His life is done. This is the end of it. And then that's really kind of where we fade to black. Now, two things. I understand your frustration with the whole book end of the documentary. I get that, because they start with the documentary, end with the documentary. But the fact that you already kind of go in this weird, like, dreamlike stance, and I probably am guessing that's the other part you have a problem with.
Correct.
Because, again,
correcto.
Yeah. But again, to me, here's what I say. That dreamlike sequence was odd to me even watching it in the film, because when I watched it in the theater, I was kind of like, where are we going here? Like, what is happening here? Like, why are we seeing this? I understand the frustration with that. But then understanding where it ends with Jack, killing his, you're finding that he killed Lily, and basically this is his ultimate punishment, which is his life is over, more or less. His career and everything else is gone too. It didn't bother me because it made sense to the story in that moment. And so while I do understand where you're going, and you're almost like, why is this in here? This is supposed to be a documentary of the last night of Night Owls. I get it. But I just didn't overthink it. Because I see why they put that in there. Because otherwise you don't see that. It's just a documentary. You don't understand the choices he made. So in that little, it's like a 2-3 minute sequence. It's not much. But in that moment, I kind of see it. I understand why they put it in there. And to me, I just didn't overthink it. And that's why it didn't really bother me. But I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, it just felt very kitchen sink. Like, let's just throw, and we've had this complaint with other movies that are just strictly fictional standard narrative style, where they just throw way too much at you. This movie had a lot of strengths and didn't necessarily need like that kind of psychedelic sequence where he goes, where it's like, how is this even footage at this point? Like, it doesn't even make sense, like where we are really. I didn't need it. It wasn't going to make the movie better. It almost was one of those instances where like a studio would go, if you don't explain this to people, they're not going to understand. I understood exactly what was going on before that scene ever popped up. I knew what was going on. I understood that Jack had made these sacrifices, and it was really, to me, just like, here's a device to get us to end the movie with a knife, with Jack putting the sacrificial dagger through Lily's heart, like that. It kind of wrapped it all together, but it just seemed like a device, and not like it didn't feel coherent to me. It just kind of rung like, okay, great. And maybe you didn't need to end it with like the ending of the documentary, and Jack Delroy was never seen again, or they don't even necessarily need that, but it was that weird just launch into something completely phantasmagoric, which sounds cool. It's a cool word. That's a $10 word there, Damon. it did launch into something completely weird and psychedelic like that, but I also felt like it was sort of like I didn't need this, and it didn't really help. And I've kind of been sitting on this opinion for over a year. I was at South by Southwest with a buddy who is also addicted to horror. We turned to each other afterwards and we went, this just was a kind of a big mess, even though it has a lot of strengths. I'm like fully admitting that it has strengths like out the ears. It really does. But something about the way the story was structured ultimately didn't work for me. It really didn't. And that it wasn't just that piece. It was even just the fact that the show literally goes on for an hour. Not every minute of a talk show is a banger, and that's true for this show too. Like there's definitely just moments where you're just like, okay, I don't know if this is really that exciting. I think it's tighter than an average episode of Saturday Night Live, which tends to sag desperately at times. So I don't think this movie does that necessarily, but it definitely lacked some of that like spark. But Damon, I'm going to pause there because I think when we get into categories, I'm going to have more to say about how I would have envisioned the way this movie came together.
Let me make one last comment on this and we'll get to categories. Here's where I would say, I guess maybe why I diverge with you so much on this particular topic. While I do understand where you're coming from, two things about that. One, when you say like we talk about how sometimes you can over-explain a plot and it's like feels unnecessary. In this particular instance, I don't necessarily think that's true because you don't like, can I come to the conclusion of what Jack did in the Grove based upon the little hints and things that we get throughout the movie? Sure. But that dreamlike sequence where he actually visits Minnie or Madeline, his wife, and they have that moment and then you see him stab her and it's actually Lily. It does kind of bookend the story of Jack Delroy, and you kind of see him fully going mad. Like you see him fully like losing everything in that moment. And in a way, you kind of need that visual because it doesn't shock you if he just stabs Lily. You see him stab Madeline, and he thinks he's putting his wife out of her misery, when in reality, he's stabbing this little like 13-year-old girl. The other side, I would say, my argument, and again, I don't want to turn this into a big debate because you're certainly entitled to your opinion. We always talk about like the unnecessary things they film in found footage, which is probably one of our biggest issues with found footage. And particularly, I know that's a huge one for you. You would not film this conversation. You would not film. But I go back to Blair Witch Project, which is a film you and I absolutely adore, and we gave an absolute rave review on this show. But even in that film, I would argue that if your friend goes missing and you find his teeth and blood and clothes and everything else, and then you hear him shouting from the woods and you go chasing after him and you find this creepy ass old shack in the middle of nowhere after you've been traipsing through these woods for several days, getting lost and finding nothing, and then you just suddenly come across this old creepy looking shack with no windows and it looks like the last place you want to be in the world. You probably wouldn't leave your cameras on to walk through there as you search for your friend, but they do, and that leads to one of the best sequences of the film, which is the ending where you see Mike in the corner, which is... Yeah.
But don't forget why they had their lights on. That's why they had their cameras rolling, because the light was the only way they could navigate through it. It was a dark black night, and if you turn on the lights... You didn't need to roll the camera, though. Yeah, 100% true.
And so all I'm saying is when you get into films, you have to suspend disbelief a little bit. And I think
of course.
And that's where I'm saying, like, that's why, like, I understand where you're coming from. I do. And I get why, like, even if the documentary thing, we eliminate that because they just want, like, a dramatic ending of, like, this is the end of Jack Delroy, and you see him stab this little girl, you hear the sirens in the background, and you're like, oh, shit, like, you know what happens. Like, he got arrested and probably put to death at that point in the 70s. So even if you don't have the book into the documentary, I understand that dreamlike sequence is kind of buggy because how did this fit into the live broadcast of Night Owls? Because in 1977, you wouldn't have seen what's going on inside of Jack Delroy's head. I get it. I understand that.
And they had a device that they could have even justified that moment with, which was Haig hypnotizing the audience.
I get it.
They didn't use that. And I go, you had that. But instead you did this other thing, which is kind of weird.
But here's the thing, just like that, you just talked about it. There's a scene where Carmichael Haig disproves. There's a moment where Lily's possessed. Her chair raises. She elevates. The whole audience is freaked out, and they're like, "Holy shit, this is real!" And the whole time, Carmichael Haig's like, "This is bullshit. Like, this is absolute utter bullshit. This is hypnotism, and I'll prove it." And he brings in what's the guy's name?
Gus.
Gus. He brings Gus over, who is like the sidekick. He is the Andy to Conan O'Brien. He is the sidekick. He is the Ed McMahon to Johnny Carson. He's like a devoutly religious man, and he's really uncomfortable with all this shit they're doing tonight. But, he's not the man in charge. He is the sidekick, so he doesn't have a whole lot to say of what's going on right now. He pulls Gus in, and he does a hypnotist trick, and you see Gus feels like he has worms, and you see he pulls his stomach open, these worms fall out, the whole crowd gasps and screams, and everyone's freaking out. Then they replay the footage, and they realize it's nothing. They were all hypnotized. You see him clawing at just his stomach, but there's nothing there. If you had a problem with the dreamlike sequence, why didn't you have a problem with that? Because if this is the live version, we wouldn't have seen that.
That's what I'm saying. This movie makes messes of its own logic, not my logic. I don't need to suspend my disbelief. I'm already bought in. It messes with its own logic, which is kind of a problem.
Again, but I'm saying, like, I think you can overthink it in this situation. Like that sequence where he hypnotizes the audience to prove that he can make them see things that aren't there. That's a key sequence because, once again, this is him saying, this is bullshit. I can prove it's bullshit by hypnotizing you. And so everyone thinks they've seen this in the live studio audience. When they replay the film, they see it's nothing. So if we're just rewatching the tape, we would not see anything either. And it wouldn't make sense if we're seeing Gus pulling at his feet and nothing's happening. We're like, what the fuck is going on here? You got to do that because it shows you what they're seeing, and then they replay it. You're like, oh, wow, it was not bullshit. And so while I understand the argument, and I get it, I feel like you can overthink it. And in that moment, just like they're running through the Blair Witch house with their cameras on, when you really wouldn't do that if you're actually searching for your friend. You wouldn't hold up a camera with the light on going, where are you, Josh? You would be running through there with the light looking for Josh. You would not give a fuck with the cameras on. This just goes back to
But see, that is kind of my point. They did it better, even though the camera was rolling in the Blair Witch, which is the one thing that's like way too convenient. They weren't even holding it on their shoulders. They were literally just holding it in there like a flashlight so they could see where they were going. It wasn't even up in the shoulder. Like, you notice the shots are actually sort of chest down shots for the most part. Like, my point is that the filmmakers for Blair Witch, like, they actually tried to engineer it as best they could. They knew they were bullshitting. They knew what you and I are saying. Of course, yes. We don't want to get into literalism. None of us do. But like, they were like, how do we get it as close as possible to making it make sense in our world? And not in, I'm with you on suspension of disbelief. I was on the ride, and I was on the ride twice. I've seen this movie twice. I just went, wow, they over-engineered their own logic, and they didn't need to. They just thought we needed to be over-explained what was happening. I was like, we really didn't. And it just started to feel like they were throwing everything they could at us. Not that he was even poorly done. I want to be clear about that. Like, I'm not like, wow, this movie sucks, like, in terms of like its execution, or like it doesn't. Like, it's executed very well. It's acted very well. It's made very well. It just was like, you added one too many ingredients to the sausage, and now I got this weird fennel taste that I can't get out of my mouth. Is what I'm saying.
I feel like you overthink it a little bit too much, because while I do understand the complaint, I do understand the criticism, I just feel like you would be missing elements of what actually makes this a really fun horror film if you take those out. Just like if you do the literal broadcast from 1977, and that's the footage you're supposed to see, we wouldn't see that Gus scene, that hypnotist scene.
I'm with you, Damon. They should have done less of the broadcast. That's my opinion. I think there was too much of the broadcast.
And I think that just goes to the heart of what makes this movie so much fun. And when you mention that, like, even talking about it now, like, I understand the dream sequence doesn't fit based upon this being a documentary. But again, just for the story, I think because when they talk about the Grove early on in the movie, like they mention, but they don't full on say like they're devil. They're just like people are like wary of what's going on behind closed doors, more or less. Like it's a men's group, and
Yeah.
rumors about what they're doing back there, and you can surmise like. I got the vibes I got were True Detective season 1. True Detective season 1, where you hear about these weird, like, these they were the Saturnalia Mardi Gras people, where they were wearing like animal masks and they were supposedly doing human sacrifice. You hear these stories, but like again, no, it's very quiet, hush hush. Then you learn as the series goes on, it's a very powerful and influential family in New Orleans that actually does these things. But that's peppered throughout 8 episodes of A True Detective. You don't really find out the real deal until like episode 7 of what they were actually doing and the true reality of what was happening. I think, again, in an hour and a half long movie, that's why you're seeing Carmichael hypnotize the audience, and you get that really freaky scene where Gus rips open his stomach and the worms fall out, and it's very dramatic, and then they replay it. It doesn't work if you don't have the hypnotist scene. It doesn't work in the like what you're seeing if you don't see it. Like it wouldn't make sense. And I understand
it kind of does, because he used the camera got the shot of the spinning thing, so you could surmise logically that you and I, the viewer at home, were watching that and got hypnotized. I mean, I honestly think that's what they're going for. I don't think I'm overthinking that. I think that's what they meant.
But what they're telling you on the broadcast is they re-show the broadcast, so they're proving it's not real. I think you overthink it by being like, well, the ending again.
Well, I'm overthinking it because their logic overthinks it, not because I was on the ride and I went, hey, there's just too many things happening.
Yeah, I feel like this is a unique original film that, while it does stretch the imagination a little bit, I get it. I get where you're coming from. That's movies. I mean, that's just movies. Like,
but Damon, you're talking to a movie fanatic. It's not, the issue isn't like, wow, how come this wasn't so grounded? I'm saying the opposite. I'll actually get into it. There's a category where I can get into specifically like how I think I would have played this movie. I'm telling you, in my opinion, they threw too many things at me. Not that it's not that, oh, why, like, this doesn't make sense. It's just like, you made too many things. That's ultimately, it's not like, I'm not even saying you made these badly. I'm saying you gave me too many. There's too much food on my plate, and the fish does not pair well with the pork. They just don't go together. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying like movies need to be literal. That's why I said it earlier. I don't want to get into literalism. I'm just saying, in the movie's logic, it's still too much for me.
Yeah, and for me, it was like the perfect dinner. It was like the great appetizer, the great entree, and the perfect dessert. And I loved absolute every second of this movie. It's my favorite horror film of the year so far. With that being said, let's get into categories. We're going to kick things off as we do each and every week on this show with best performance. And Patrick, you already kind of teased this earlier, so you might as well go ahead and get into it. Who is your best performance in Late Night with the Devil?
As I said, Damon, this movie does a lot of things right, and the thing it did most right was cast David Dastmalchian as Jack Delroy. Fantastic acting. Now, I'm pretty sure probably the first time you ever saw him was The Dark Knight as well. It is his first major role of anything that he's ever done. David Dastmalchian has the chops to lead a film. You said it earlier. It's time for this guy to start leading plenty of films. By the way, this is a box office success. Plenty of buzz around it. Plenty of people like it, Damon included. David Dastmalchian should be getting more roles because he played this very well. You buy into who the guy is. I feel like David's got a great ability to inform his characters. I feel like there's a bigger world going on behind his eyes. I actually listened to Last Podcast on the Left, or I think that's what it's called. Was it called Last? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, that's what it's called. Yeah.
Yeah, they're literally one of the most. It's like Joe Rogan, Last Podcast on the Left. They're like the two biggest podcasts on the planet. He went on that show and talked about his acting style. It's actually a great episode to listen to. He's got incredible acting instincts, and they're all over this movie. And for all the nuttiness and for all the extraneous things that they threw at me, I was never like, wow, David Dasmalkian's not working. Quite the opposite. I go, give this man an award. What's he going to do? Because he's going to have to accept the best performance at the Fangoria Awards. Is he going to be hosting and accept an award? Because you know it's coming.
Yeah, I think unfortunately because of like his success in The Dark Knight, where he played a really good kind of kooky offbeat character in the Joker's henchman, and then he kind of plays a lot of kooky offbeat characters. A lot of people say he comes from theater. That's his background is theater before he got into like movie acting. And he kind of plays that offbeat kooky character in a lot of movies, different versions of that offbeat kooky character, but that's kind of his thing. And it kind of bugs me a little bit because watching this movie, I'm like, this is a leading man. Like he can absolutely lead a broad like this. When he does his, and I know he based the character loosely on an Australian TV show host. I think his name was Jack Lane, if I'm not mistaken, or Jack something like that.
Yeah, Jack something.
Jack Lane, I think was the name from. It was an Australian late night TV show. And that's kind of who he based it upon. He's got the chops. Like this is not an offbeat kooky.
I think it was Jack Mayo. I'm sorry. I think that just popped into my head.
Maybe that's who it was. But yeah, so it was an Australian TV show host who he kind of loosely based the character on. And he really does it. Like there's not any part of this where it feels like he's trying to play a late night TV show host. He is a late night, like watching this, I'm like, give this guy a late night show. Let's see what he can do. Like, let's see him. Like,
seriously.
Yeah. So yeah, he absolutely kills it. And again, as I said earlier, and I'll say it again now, give this man more leading roles because he can absolutely lead an entire production. And I don't know what that's going to be. I know he's a huge horror guy. Great. Give him another big horror film. Give him a franchise and let him lead. Let him take the reins. Let him, be the Dr. Loomis or whatever you want to say,
Damon, I just, the thought popped in my head right now. I know it's hallowed ground and I know we've gone there before, but why not go there again? Psycho remake starring David Dasmalkian.
I could see that.
I mean, I know we don't like to touch that movie and we've done it before to poor results, but he's got that thing.
Yeah. I mentioned kind of jokingly right there, like Dr. Loomis, like I would like to see him in that kind of a role because I think even playing like the Anthony Perkins character in Psycho would almost be a little too in his wheelhouse. Like I feel like I want him to play the hero. Like I want him to play the Dr. Loomis character. You know what I mean? Like the guy who's meant to save the day in a way. Like that kind of like that's kind of like he could play Nancy's father in Nightmare on Elm Street, something to that effect, like where he's like the literal good guy. I think that would be an interesting. Again, I just pitching.
No, that's good. No, go against type. I think he'd dig something like that.
Yeah, so I think that'd be fun to see him in. I just think he's really good in this movie, and it kind of, I'm not saying it bums me out, like not so like again, he's had an incredibly good career, and he seems very happy with what he's doing. Yeah. So I don't want to tell David Dasmalchian what he should be doing, but I'm watching this movie saying this is a leading man. Like this is a leading man. Like give him more leading roles.
Couldn't agree more.
So the answer for best performance is David Dasmalchian. Let me just be clear about that. But I'm going to go in another direction because again, we don't always like to give the same answer on the show, and so a lot of this cast outside of David are a lot of like real character actors you probably never heard of before. It's a very small independent film. If you dig on their IMDb pages, maybe you've seen something they're in before, but chances are there's a lot of actors in the movie you're like, I have never seen this guy or this girl in anything else before this. My best performance goes to Ingrid Torelli, who plays young Lily, who is the possessed girl in this film. From the second she steps out on stage as this girl who grew up in a cult, who was rescued and now is being raised by her psychologist, she has a very creepy demeanor to her, but almost like when she first shows up, you can kind of see it in her eyes. She's like, I want to be a star. She's almost got that like Pearl quality to her, that Mia Goth Pearl / Maxine quality to her. She's like, I'm ready for my scene, Mr. DeVille. She wants to be in front of the camera. She's excited for this opportunity. So she kind of plays to it. Like, and when he's suggesting, like, can we bring out, they call him Mr. Wriggles, the demon that's inside her, this demon she connects with. Can we see it? And the psychologist is like, whoa. Like, we're not doing that. Like, we're not going there. Lily's like, no, I got no problem with that. Let me put on a show. Let me put on a performance. And she sells it so well. And then when she flips into the Regan possessed by the spirit of Exorcist in that movie, like that kind of role, it's fucking creepy. She sells it so well. And I don't know how old Ingrid Torelli is. I'm assuming she's probably like 14, 15 in real life. Like she's supposed to be like 12, 13 in the movie. She's probably 14, 15 in real life. Kills it. Absolutely kills it and sells it so well. From the first minute of this movie to the last when she's out of it, I'm like, damn, like that was a performance.
I'm glad you brought her up. I had a feeling you would too. I was like, I knew we were going to talk about David Dastmalchian, but the other standout performance in this movie is 100% Ingrid Torelli. I got very Manson Girl vibes. You know what I mean? Like, you and I both love Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Some of the most tense parts of that movie are when they are on the ranch and they are interacting with these women who all pray at the altar of Charlie Manson. She gave that big time. And like just the sort of like bright, like the big, bright, distant eyes that you couldn't quite pin down. You didn't quite know where she was going. She felt like a wild card. And she also did a great job in her possession scenes and all of that. But there was something just sort of unwholesome about how pure she could act. Like she was acting very like kind of, bright and bubbly, but something behind the eyes was telling you, no. This is a crocodile ready to snap. So I'm glad you picked her because I fully agree that she was the other great stand-up performance in this movie.
It's a line that I always remember from Fight Club where Brad Pitt's character goes, she's a predator posing as a house pet. That's kind of what this is. She's like, you can see like there's something not right there. Like she's very cute and smiley and demure and she's a young girl and you're like, innocence. Like again, children are supposed to be innocent, but there's something dark hiding behind this girl's eyes and you see it right away. And I think that goes to the performance of Ingrid Torelli to do that.
Totally. And it's funny, like I think David is also an actor where so much happens behind his eyes, and I think all the greats can do it. And he talked about it on the last podcast on the left. Ingrid does that as well. Like there's just something in the eyes that tells a bigger story. That's like that next level acting that I absolutely just sop up with a biscuit.
Yeah. Now let's talk about the best guest on Night Owls because this is a late night TV show and this is a guest driven hour of television, what's supposed to be a late night TV show. And they have multiple guests. I mentioned it earlier. We meet Christou, who is a medium who comes there to kind of read minds and give futures and be a psychic medium. And then we meet Carmichael Haig, who is the former psychic hypnotist turned skeptic who disproves all these people. And then, of course, we meet Lily and the psychologist who now raises her. Of all the guests we met on Late Night with the Devil on Night Owls, who was your favorite? And I'll just go ahead and spoil it ahead of time and say your favorite is also my favorite.
I literally put this in so we could give ourselves some time to talk about what I think you and I would agree is 100% our favorite guest, Carmichael Haig, of course. The skeptic, Damon, because when I watched this a second time around, I remember the first time around, I really enjoyed the character, but the second time around, I was like, this is me and Damon 100%. We would be doing cartwheels and drop kicks and handstands to prove all of this to be complete and utter horseshit. We don't buy into it. We aren't those kind of guys. We just aren't. If you do it, cool. No big deal. But if you bring me onto a show, I'm going to be the voice of opposition, the skeptical voice, the voice that says, okay, I know you want to believe this, but let me show you how there's another way to look at it. I think you and I are very much that person. And I had a feeling we would probably share the same choice.
Yeah, he is the skeptic who's there to disprove everything, and that is me. I call myself a skeptic. I'm a lifelong skeptic. I like to question things. I do that in everyday life, not just beyond. I live by the code of science, which is I believe it if you can prove it to me, and so. That character spoke to me and I loved it. I mean, even though in the end, he's proven wrong because there actually is a demon in the movie and all that kind of stuff. But everything up until that exact moment when he's like, it's really funny too. He tries to give her the check, like, here's the money. And she's like, fuck you, and snaps his neck and he dies. But up until that moment, I'm like, even when he does the hypnosis trick, which we talked about, like when he hypnotizes Gus in the audience and makes them think they're seeing worms come out of his stomach and all this kind of craziness. It's brilliant. He does it so well when he's like, let's review the footage. And they see, oh my God, this didn't actually happen. It's all bullshit. And he's like, see, I proved it to you. I was like, when he did the whole thing with Gus and the worms coming out of his stomach, and then he plays it back and everyone in the audience is stunned to see they were all fooled. I was like, that is so great. Like, that is the perfect, like, skeptic guy who would go on there and just absolutely prove this is utter bullshit, and I just loved it. And I loved that character. And you're right. Like, that was you and me. Like, that, I was watching this thinking this would be Patrick and I. We would 100% be Carmichael Haig on this show. It reminded me, I saw a clip on TikTok a couple weeks ago, or maybe it was like a week ago. Neil deGrasse Tyson, who is a guy I admire a lot and I've actually seen speak in person a couple of times. He was on Amber Rose. I think she's like a hip hop.
Yeah.
She was I don't know, she's an influencer star or whatever. I don't know what her big claim to fame is, but she does a podcast. And she asked Neil deGrasse Tyson something about, do you believe in Mars being in retrograde, which is all about like the astrology, and the look on his face.
I love that clip, by the way. I've seen that clip.
You know what I'm talking about? And
yes, I do.
He's like, the planets align. He's like, so just so you know, the planets don't give a fuck when you were born. Like, he's like, you do not give a shit. Yeah. None of that means anything. It means nothing. Astrology is bullshit. Like, it's utter bullshit. But him saying that, like, the look on his face when she asked him, like, do you believe in Mars is in retrograde? And he's just like, oh my God. And you just see him go like, I think his line is, the planets don't give a fuck when you were born.
Yeah, and he basically says, like, the person who came up with that on an old model that where we thought the universe revolved around us. He goes, so even the retrograde aspect of Mercury being in retrograde, he goes, that's based off something that's fundamentally flawed. Like, that's not how the retrograde works. So it's complete
Mars in retrograde, Mercury in retrograde, whatever.
Yeah,
bullshit. Mercury, Mars, whatever.
Yeah, he goes, but planets don't give a fuck when you were born. They just don't. And it's all based off of a completely incorrect alignment that someone came up with long before we understood how the universe actually worked. So how could you possibly apply it to us?
Yeah, so it was hilarious. But that's what that kind of reminded me of. That character reminded me of that clip with Neil deGrasse Tyson. I loved it because that's me. That's us. That's what we do. And so, I was like, honestly, if I had to pinpoint my favorite aspect of Late Night with the Devil, it's that character was included, because you and I both know, even today, even on today's society of like 2024, where we have so many more resources at our fingertips, people would be afraid to have a guy like that on their show. Like, they would have on the psychic, and they would have on the woman explaining astrology, and they would have on the Mercury and retrograde bull. They would have all that. They would be terrified of losing their audience if they brought on Neil deGrasse Tyson to say this is all bullshit. That's where we are now, because people are like, I got to pander to a certain audience, and if I insult them by saying this isn't real, they're going to tune out. The fact that they actually willingly had this guy on the show, quote unquote, in the 70s, which again, by that point, you got to remember, there's no internet, there's no easy access to information. I loved it. That was my favorite part of the movie, because he's just like, everything that was going on, he's like, this is utter bullshit. And it's just, I loved it because even today they don't do that.
Yeah, they don't do it enough. I mean, I think guys like Bill Nye and Neil and a few others, they kind of fill that role. What I loved about him is he was so crass, and so he was really like verbose. He had all these great words that he was he was trying to over intellectualize himself to seem like he was smarter and above the audience, and he's very smug and all that stuff. Which I think Christopher Hitchens was another guy like that, where he was incredibly smug and incredibly crass, and he'd get on a show and he would just cut you down. He'd make you feel stupid for thinking about any other way than the way he thought. That was the Haig character. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I'm just so glad they included that, because like I said, they'll have specific shows where they'll have debate, but you and I both know, generally speaking, if your audience is people who love Mercury and retrograde stuff, they're not going to bring on Neil deGrasse Tyson. So
I already know some of our listeners are like, you shut the fuck up about Mercury retrograde. That's fucking for real. I'll prove it to you. Like, I guarantee, I already know some of our listeners are like, no, you don't understand. Mercury retrograde is absolutely real.
Yeah, I am a Leo, and I can point to all my Leo specific traits. That is real. Okay.
I'm telling you, I'm a Capricorn, and that is exactly how we roll.
Yeah,
Okay, that shit
exactly.
ain't real. Like that's how
Exactly.
Caps roll.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I get it. That's trust me. I see it all the time on Twitter. People I follow, and I'm just like,
Yeah.
good lord. Uh, let's move on to our next category, and that is, of course, the great Ken Foray Banana Hammock MVP Award. This is the award named after great character actor Ken Foray from the movie From Beyond, where he jumped down a flight of stairs and into a basement wearing nothing more than a thong bikini and a butcher knife to stop a creature from attacking. That is why we call this the Ken Foray Banana Hammock MVP Award. And Patrick, who did you give your MVP award for Late Night with the Devil?
Damon, my MVP award does go to the Karn brothers, the writers and directors of this film. The attention to detail in this movie is undeniable. I think the way the show is presented, all of the set design, all of the character work, all the stuff, it actually brings me back to when I was little. Now, yes, I grew up in the 1980s, but the early 1980s are very much sort of the last little shockwaves of the 1970s. So a lot of the little details and stuff that I saw in the show were very much they very much reminded me of life growing up when I was young, because my parents' house didn't look like neon and fucking black and white and super stark and yuppie. It looked like, yeah, like it looked like they bought the house in the 1970s, and it still mostly looked like it was in the 1970s. So that's how it felt in my childhood. And I very much got that in the details and in the little things that go on through this movie, all the little choices they made, all the little backstory from the documentary, all of it felt very authentic. And it's really easy to kind of let go of that at some point because you're too busy trying to make the movie. The fact that they could keep everything on track and make it feel like a 1970s program through and through, all the way through, even in the nuttiest moments that I didn't buy necessarily, it still very much felt like every detail was painstakingly combed over. They wanted it to look and feel authentic.
So I want to give flowers in terms of MVP to David Desmalchian for attaching himself to this project, because he is the kind of I don't even know if David would call himself an A-lister. He's not a household name. He's not Brad Pitt or George Clooney or Robert Downey Jr. It's not a guy. Again, he's very much a that guy. Like, oh, I know that guy.
You would call him a character actor, sure.
Yeah, but attaching himself to an indie project like this and then promoting it the way he did. As I said, when I first heard about this movie, I thought it was his movie. I thought he wrote it too. Like, that's how attached David Desmalchi was to it. So I want to give him his flowers. But the real answer, and why I just want to say that, is the MVP is the Karn brothers. But I go in a slightly different direction, even though I know you bump up against a lot of the things that happened in this movie and the choices they made, from the hypnotist, even if we don't even want to talk about the hypnotist scene, mainly talking about the documentary aspect kind of being abandoned, and even in that final sequence with the dreamlike sequence of seeing what Jack Delroy was seeing with his connecting with his dead wife. What I've said over and over and over again on this podcast is the originality of this movie. This is not something I've seen before. It's not, and what I love about this movie and what I love about the originality of this movie is when you watch it, my first thought was, how is this not done before? Like, how is this
the talk show format footage thing? Yeah, like I felt the same way when I first watched it.
In the found footage genre, in the low budget horror genre, I went to a horror convention recently and I picked up a movie. I want to say it's called Dead Call. It's behind me. I don't want to turn around and look at the name of the movie. It has Bill Moseley in it. There's a movie out there about a radio show host talking on the air, and like basically the zombie apocalypse starts happening around. I think it's called Dead Air is what it's actually called. Dead Air is what it's called. And there's another movie like that. I can't remember. It's another famous, but they're very similar to each other. It's basically a one-room film where a disc jockey, a radio disc jockey, is broadcasting, and it's almost like War of the Worlds. Shit starts going on outside the world, and he's broadcasting during this. Very simple, easy to do plot, but it's all one room, and you're not seeing what's really happening around him because you're just hearing about it. You're hearing the phone calls, you're hearing police sirens outside and explosions and there's shit going on. But he's broadcasting, trying to tell the world what's going on during this live broadcast. And there's another movie similar to that was more famous, but Dead Air, the one with Bill Moseley, is the one I know, which is, again, somewhat similar to this. But that is such a simple format. It's a radio show host who is doing a late night talk show, late night radio show, and bad things start happening in the world. He gets call-ins, people saying, oh my God, this is happening, and this is happening, and the world's going crazy, and he's like trying to tell the world what's happening while he's live on the air. That, to me, when I saw that the first time, I was like, wow, that's really cool. Like, what a simple, easy idea, and it works because Bill Moseley is great. I love Bill Moseley, one of my favorite horror actors. And they sell it really well. Like the call-ins, the frantic nature of the guests on the show, the people calling in, and his reaction to all this. And then you have like a studio producer, a couple of the characters in the movie, but it's I think it's like a 3-person cast, more or less. Watching this, I was like, how has this not been done before? How has someone not, like, when I watched this, I was like, I had to have seen this before. Like, there has to be another version of this. There's not. And that's why I love what the Coen brothers did here, is because it's wholly original. It's something I've never seen before, but it's so relatable that in my head, I'm like, how has this not been done before?
No shit. I mean, I think maybe there's someone out there who's like, hey, they did it with like TikTok, or they did it in some format. Like, I know there are movies that like take place all online during a live Deadstream, I think was one. You know, it's like, they're like, we have done this. We just did it way more modern. But I know what you mean. Like, the actual idea of finding footage makes way more sense because I actually work in live broadcasting. You hit the record on the Key Pros, and you record every camera, you record everything that's happening for the entirety of that show, no matter what, until you unrecord. So of course there would be all this footage of a late night TV show gone wrong. It actually makes sense why that footage would exist. And so I was like, yeah, like when I was watching, I was going, why hasn't someone thought of doing that before?
Yeah, it's just, again, like you could even talk about Host, you know, like that's a movie where it's like that was a creative idea done during the pandemic when we couldn't get together and film, and they did a horror movie over a Zoom, which, again, whether you love or hate Host, and I know a lot of people love that movie, I'm not even, like, this is not me critiquing good or bad and telling you to watch it. The originality is undeniable. You took a situation in a pandemic where you could not film and people couldn't be around each other, and you said, how can I get around this and make something different? Oh, I could put everyone on a Zoom call, which is what we were doing at the height of the pandemic. It's what we do to record this podcast. So, like that, like, again, even if you love or hate Host, the originality you can't deny. Wow, what a cool way to get around not being able to get together and film right now. You did a Zoom call. That's pretty cool and unique. Same thing here. Like I said, when I watched it, I'm like, I had to have seen this before. Nope. Never been done before, at least not to my knowledge. And that's, again, love it or hate it, you got to give it applause for originality.
Absolutely.
Let's move on to Best Scare. This is a horror movie, of course, so there are scares in this movie. So, Patrick, what was your best scare in Late Night with the Devil?
Any possible instance of Mr. Wriggles. Now, really, it is just sort of, there's one segment where Lily channels Mr. Wriggles, but when he actually like shows up, it's a pretty gnarly scene. Like, it's pretty, it sort of reminded me of, you remember that movie Little Monsters? Mm-hmm. Fred Savage back in the day, yeah. and like the final monster they had to face, it almost kind of looked like him. Like, there was just something about it that was kind of creepy. Best scare, is scare the right word here necessarily? No, it's not really a scare. It's just a creep factor. It's kind of the kooky factor of it all. The thing that makes it feel really horror are those moments with Mr. Wriggles.
Yeah, that's really well done, and there's a great couple of scenes in there where, again, this goes back to Ingrid's performance as well. But like when Mr. Wriggles shows up and you see him come out of Lily, it's pretty creepy, and it works really, really well. And it's, again, very reminiscent of Reagan in The Exorcist, except it's almost a little more obtuse in this movie. Like, they're not hitting you over the head with this creature. Like, they don't totally change her body. They kind of change her facial features. Her hair's kind of down in her face a little bit. Again, low budget movies, so they don't have a huge amount of money to work with, like, makeup and things like that. But when Mr. Wriggles actually does pop out, it's pretty freaky. So I went with a more traditional kind of jump scare. And again, there's a lot. I agree. Mr. Wriggles was great. I thought, even when Christu vomits all the black stuff up, that was pretty good, like just out of nowhere. But there's one scene where it's Carmichael's trying to disprove everything, and they replay some of the scenes. Like, they do the scene again where they're just like, they show he does the scene where he hypnotizes everybody and proves that it's all bullshit. And then they play back the scene with Lily, and there's a real brief flash in that scene where you see Madeline standing behind Jack, and it's a real brief flash. It's this white figure, kind of ghost-like, bald because she had cancer, so she's lost her hair. And he's talking, and you see the scene, you see her just flash. Almost like Fight Club, when you see those little flashes of Tyler Durden when Edward Norton's on screen. Real brief, real flash, and then, of course, that's when Jack starts to freak out because he sees it. He's like, what are you doing? What are you fucking with me? Why are you doing this to me? That little flash in that moment did get me in the theater. I was like, oh, shit, what was that? It was just a real quick, jarring moment. It did get me.
And they were kind of building it up where he was like telling them to jog the footage, right? He was like, play it frame by frame, slower. So they're kind of building to that moment, and then they build to that moment. And then you see her appear. You think you're going to see something with Lily, and instead you see that Minnie was standing behind him that whole time.
Yeah, it was just really creepy because when they finally do it, it's like a little slower, frame by frame, go frame by frame, and you see it, and it's jarring when she pops on the screen because you're like, something's there, and then when you see what it is, you're like, oh, shit. So it definitely got me in the theater. That was a good one. Let's talk about best gore. This is not a super gory movie because I don't think you really can make it be a super gory movie, but what did you take for best gore?
Really, I think my best gore is sort of where the gore starts, like, and from that point on, it actually kind of ramps up a little bit. But it's when Carmichael decides to hypnotize the audience and us and everybody in the studio to believe that Gus has worms coming out of his body. I loved, like, the execution. It might be maybe my favorite, like, singular moment in the movie, because when Gus goes, Carmichael goes, oh, there's like something on your neck. And he goes, yeah, I cut myself shaving today. It just has this great little bit of like, there's a little irritated slice of skin, and you and I have shaved, so it's happened where you nick yourself. And then he starts to pick at it, and then when the worms come out, it looked so good. Even though it was very like, okay, 70s, they built up his neck a little bit, and they even executed like the gore in a 70s way. And then he rips open his shirt, and he's tearing worms out of his gut. I was like, man, this is gore fantastic. And just the idea of worms under your body is that body horror aspect that always gets me. Body horror is one of my favorite things because it actually does get under my skin, if you will.
It kind of reminded me of that scene in Creepshow with the roaches. The original Creepshow with the roaches, kind of like that, because that one freaked me out because I'm not scared of insects, but roaches freak me out, as they probably should everybody. And so that scene kind of reminded me of that with the worms under the skin. You see it kind of wriggling under the skin. You see him pull his skin apart. It's pretty gross when all the guts and everything start falling out. It's pretty wild. And that is really the truly goriest part of this movie. And then when they show that it's nothing actually happened, I just love that when they're like, oh, you think worms are crawling out of your stomach? Really? And then they replay it and show he's just like pulling at his skin and there's nothing there. I love that. I absolutely love that. That's really the best gore because that's really the only truly gory part. But I do want to call out Christu vomiting the black tar-like substance was pretty cool when he's getting like these weird vibes and you can see like something's off. Like he's not like we get a sense early on that like he's a total bullshit artist, but there is something going on there. And then when he vomits up all that black substance is pretty freaky and gross. And then the ending when Lily just goes haywire and Carmichael's like, here, take the check. And she snaps his neck and his head twists around very graphically. I love that scene too because it's just like, oh, you don't believe this? Whoop. And his head just twists around and dies. I just love that. Just like a really quick, nasty death.
Yeah. I mean, there's certainly moments, especially near the end, where it gets rather graphic.
Yeah. Next category, let's get into remake, sequel, or leave it alone. And this is, of course, pretty self explanatory. This is where we take whatever movie we are reviewing and we say, should they remake it? Should they sequelize it? Or should they leave it alone? So, Patrick, I feel like I know where you're going with this one. Remake, sequel, or leave it alone for Late Night with the Devil?
Damon, this is really weird for me. I don't quite know how to answer this other than just to say remake, but I don't really mean remake. So I think my biggest problem with this movie, and I'm going to admit that there may be even a little bit of bias behind the way I thought about this. You know, I don't like found footage. I mean, it's not a blanket statement, but 9 times out of 10, a found footage movie doesn't work for me, just in general. It's not an enjoyable cinematic experience for me. I was watching this, I felt this the first time, and I felt it this time too. I go, this movie is in its own way because it's treating this as found footage. Because of that little documentary moment up front where it says, now here's the final bit of footage. It was hampered by having to be found footage. Anytime they kind of took a subjective angle, because again, this is kind of a hybrid movie. Anytime they took a subjective angle, I was like really into it. And I was very interested in it when it was more subjective. My remake would be recut this and cut down the live show aspect. The live show literally runs the entirety of the show. I think it runs for like a full hour. There's a monologue, there's everything. You can argue, yes, there's some world building in there. It's not like it's extraneous, but it just is a live show. And then they do these little cut arounds. I think I would restructure this movie to have less of the TV show and more, it's weird. I want more subjective angles, like lean way more into the subjective aspects of this movie. And I think it would be that much more interesting. Now, in a fantasy world, I would say let's remake this movie, get everybody in place again, all the same actors, all the same elements and everything, and then just cut to the actual footage of the show whenever like a supernatural thing happened. Like it would look kind of cool to see it behind the lens of an old camera, but any other time you're on a very subjective camera with the characters in the room feeling the drama and feeling the dread of like what is really happening here. This is supposed to just be a TV show. I think it would have been better because those the show itself to me just went on too long and it kind of sucked the energy out of the experience for me. And I actually did a little impromptu exit poll because there was a group of people watching. I go, what did you guys think? And they went, it got kind of slow. It got kind of tiring. Nobody was like, I loved it. Like, no, like I know on the internet, everybody's loving it and good. Go Champion Movies. I fully support that. The exit poll in the theater was like, oh, we got kind of tired watching it because it just kept kind of going because and maybe they weren't articulating it in a way that you and I do because we watch hundreds of movies a year. But to me, it felt like it was tamped down a little bit by that template of no, we have to play the episode in its entirety. I get that that's part of the novelty. Just like I get, like, you know, the part of Deadpool's novelty is he's going to turn to the camera and make a joke that we are supposed to know is a joke. Like, that's Deadpool's job. The job of this movie was, no, we're just going to play you like an episode of television and shit's going to go wrong in it. Some people really like that. I think the strengths in this movie lied in actually the more subjective stuff and not the just objective playthrough of the TV show.
And while I understand, like, again, that's what you would prefer on this, and my answer to this question is leave it alone because my favorite aspect of this film was the hour-long broadcast. It was just literally the late night TV show, and it's funny, I had almost the exact opposite experience because, again, weirdly, I saw this on a Saturday night at 10 o'clock in my theater of about, it was a 30-seat theater, and there was about 15 to 20 people in there. We all kind of buzzed walking out of there, and like everyone leaving was kind of like, wow, that was so original, that was so cool, so different, I hadn't seen anything like that. Those kind of comments. I didn't sit and like interview anybody, but And again, the creators I follow on TikTok and things like that, like that's been the general consensus is this is something we've never seen before. And I think if you eliminate that, you eliminate the originality of this a little bit because you're taking that aspect away, which is this is the hour-long footage. Again, I understand you have to use suspension of disbelief with the whole fantasy sequence, and even to the certain extent of the hypnotism. Even if you're trying to play like Carmichael actually hypnotized us, even watching it, to me that's stretching it pretty far for what actually would happen in like he hypnotized the audience in 1977, and now we're being hypnotized again in 2000. That seems like a bit much for me. But again, I can suspend disbelief and see why if you don't put that in there, it's not as effective. You got to have it where you see Gus ripping his stomach open, the worms and all that kind of stuff. So that's why I say leave it alone, because that talk show aspect to me, and again, I'm talking as a person who loves how the sausage gets made movies and the behind the scenes of TV and films. I love those TV and films. That's, to me, what makes this such a fun movie-going experience is that fact that you literally get the hour-long episode of Night Owls as the movie, more or less. You get the little 10 to 12-minute intro, and then you get those little interlaced, commercial breaks throughout the show, which, as we know, if you watch TV, an hour show has about 18 commercial breaks. That's what this is, and so it ends up being about a 90-minute movie. There's nothing extraneous. I understand where you say for you it moves slow. For me, it didn't, because it felt genuinely building the tension. When you meet Christou, and you kind of see like he's kind of a bullshit artist, and he's very much like the lead guest, where you're like, this guy's not very good at his job. And then you meet Carmichael, who just full-on disproves this guy's a fraud. And then, then you learn that Christou died in the hospital, something weird's going on there. And then you meet Lily and the psychologist, and things just progressively get worse and worse. I thought it played like a genuine talk show. Like it played like a genuine, like I can't tell you the last time I watched an episode of The Tonight Show from start to finish. I don't know that I've ever watched, and even Arsenio Hall, I don't know that I ever watched from the monologue to the credits. I'll be honest. Like I may have watched for a guest or watched for a musical guest or watched the first half hour. I don't know that I've ever sat down and watched an entire hour of The Tonight Show or Late Night with Steve, none of those. But this felt genuinely what that is. It is an hour, and there are parts that drag, and there are parts of some guests that maybe you're not into. But for me, it all worked because of the escalating tension from Christou, kind of the bullshit artist, to Carmichael, which was my favorite aspect of the entire movie, to Lily, which you just see it getting worse and worse, and you just know it's not going to end well.
I would definitely cut away less during the Lily moments. Like I would play more of her footage. I think that was some of the strongest stuff. But you kind of proved my point there, Damon. Like you don't watch a full hour of late night TV. That's exactly my point.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, that's the difference with this is I was enthralled the entire hour of this thing. Like, I was actually into it. Like, I actually enjoyed all the guests because of the escalating tension. And even the cutaways when you find out that Jack is having an affair with the psychologist, that's how this whole thing really started, was he got hooked up with this woman and he finds out about this cult. And so he's like, well, you come on, bring Lily and blah, blah, blah. And it just keeps getting worse and worse. And you see and all this, much like we see, I talked about earlier, like you'll do anything for ratings. His producer's like, this is working. They're like, Christou's dead. And he's like, don't tell Gus. Gus will freak out if he finds out Christou's dead. Don't tell him. Just keep going. The ratings are fucking great. This is all going well. And even Jack's like, man, this is kind of going a little haywire right now. His producer's like, no, dude. This is golden. Like, who cares that there's a fire breaking out in the middle of the stadium and it's going to kill thousands of people? Keep playing. Like, keep playing, dude. Like, this is the Who in Cincinnati in 1970, whatever it is, where there was a stampede that killed people. Who cares? Keep playing. People are loving this. That's kind of what it felt like, was like the roller coaster is clearly going off the tracks, but they're so enamored with, like, what's going to happen. They're just like, who cares? There's a few deaths. Everyone's going to watch. So again, to me, this is leave it alone, because even though I understand where you're coming from, for me personally, that's why I love this movie, because it was literally that hour of television where the escalating tension just keeps getting worse and worse. And by the end, even though that dream sequence, again, I understand why you say it doesn't quite fit in there. It's just like, this is almost like you're seeing this all in a weird way. You're seeing it all through Jack Delroy's point of view of how this whole thing went horrifically wrong for him. In a weird way, you are seeing a subjective view. Even though you're seeing a camera on Jack Delroy, this is really Jack Delroy's point of view of everything that went wrong to cause his life to fall apart and this to be basically the end of his career and more or less the end of his life.
And that's kind of my point is like, I really like the subjective parts of this movie. I just wanted more of them. I think it just, again, and I know I'm in the minority because I know you're not like, you like found footage more than me, but you're not like the biggest champion of found footage. Most people out there like fucking love it. Like they don't even care how you deliver it to them. It's like, yeah, just play me like weird raw footage with like, extraneous conversations that don't really matter to the story. This movie doesn't even do that. Like I think the story, even the playthrough of the entire hour does escalate the story correctly. Like it doesn't even do it wrong. I was just like, yeah, I'm way more into the subjective version of this story. That was way more engaging for me. I know I'm probably in the minority on that in general, because I think this is a universally beloved movie. To me, the subjective moments were the better moments.
And here's why I also say this is the kind of found footage movie I like, because this is found footage shot well. Because one of my biggest issues with footage movies is like, I know a lot of people say like I can't watch found footage because it gives me motion sickness. I don't get motion sickness, I really don't, but I still watching like a camera jostle around and shooting at the floor and like it just drives me crazy. Like I'm like, don't you have a fucking gimbal? Like I have a gimbal. I have like an iPhone with a gimbal. I can make shit not shake. Like I can just hold the gimbal and it goes and moves and like adjusts itself. Like that's modern technology. I understand Blair Witch Project in 1999, you didn't have that. But if you're shooting found footage in 2024, it does not make sense that any even amateur filmmaker wouldn't have a gimbal to where your footage isn't shaking and looks like you're going through a fucking earthquake.
No shit, dude. I don't want to get started on found footage because it'll bum people out. It's just not, it's not my scene.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, you know me, I'm not right. I'm right there with you.
I know. Yeah. You're closer to my end of the spectrum. You might like a few more than I do, but I know most people like seem to just eat up found footage. But that's this isn't even a traditional found footage movie by any stretch.
It's not, and that's why I'm like, give me more of this. This is the found footage I can deal with because, like,
honestly, I would certainly show up for way more. Like, oh, this is from a taping of Three's Company that went wrong. I'd be like, yeah, sign me up. I will sit and watch that. That's way more interesting to me.
At least the camera's not shaking every 8 seconds.
No shit.
Let's talk about our next category, which is, can we survive this horror film? Now, Patrick, this is an interesting category because what we do here is we inject ourselves into whatever film we are reviewing. Now, we've already said if we were in Late Night with the Devil, we were on an episode of Night Owls, you and I would both be Carmichael Haig, which means we're both fucking dead.
Oh, yeah.
Is that the easiest answer here? Like, there's no way we're surviving this because, like, I would be the skeptic saying, Lily, come on now, this is all bullshit.
Damon, I'm going to tell you something right now. Take a look at this guy. If you saw this guy walking down the street in 1977, you would be 100% sure that he is what? A Satanist. You'd be like, that guy's a Satanist. So I'm going to flip the script here, Damon, and say I will survive because I believe I'd be one of those guys in the robes that were worshiping, what was Braxis or whatever the fuck it was.
Braxis, yeah, Braxis.
And I'm going to you can just take a good look at what this patch on my hat. And I'm not going to say what it is because you're going to have to go to YouTube and see that because we need more YouTube people. So I'm going to Damon, what is on my hat right now is something you would say in the 1970s.
Yes.
I'm surviving Late Night with the Devil. How's that for a shocker ending?
That's true. You might be one of the guys in the robe saying, give me everything Abraxas. You are one of the Tuttle family here. You are in the cult that is going to sacrifice people and survive. I would not be because I am 100% Carmichael Haig saying this is utter bullshit. It's not true. Stop being fake. And then I would be handing out the $500,000 check and watching my neck get snapped. So yeah, I'm not making it. I fully admit I know me, and I have a problem with that. Sometimes I admit this. Like I've gotten into really heated debates with people that get ugly because I can't abide bullshit. Like I just can't. And when it's like the psychic conversation or like the Mercury in retrograde thing.
Yeah, I have trouble biting my tongue.
My girlfriend has a cousin who came to visit us once years ago, and she is way on that side of the fence. And we started talking, and my girlfriend's like, at one point, she's just like, stop. Because, like, it got
Yeah.
to the point where I was being Christopher Hitchens, where I'm like talking down to her, but I'm like, do you not understand? Like 2 + 2 is 4.
Yeah.
It's not 8. And like I'm being condescending, but like that's kind of where we got to, where I'm just like I had to like almost like simplify it to the point, and she's just like, "You're getting kind of mean." I'm like, "I'm sorry, but like I can't abide this bullshit." So yeah, I would 100% be the one to push it too far and get my neck snapped. So yeah.
But my wife doesn't like it when I engage with people, and I'll talk about politics stuff. I actually try to be very even handed, because people tend to get turned off if you start to belittle them or something like that. But she's like, stop arguing with people. And so what I've done, and Damon, you'll get a kick out of this, and if anyone in our audience watched the show Succession like you and I did, where we ravenously gobbled up that episode, that TV show, Logan Roy had a great little moment. The great Brian Cox created this little thing that Logan would do when someone was feeding him a line of absolute horseshit. And Logan knew he was the smartest guy in the room every time. Not saying I am. I'm just saying Logan knew that. So I steal his little, So I do that now. When I hear total horseshit coming at me, I go, and she knows, and she'll fucking like elbow me or something. She goes, stop doing that. Because she knows what I'm thinking when I do that. Because I'm going, you are just spouting off absolute horseshit right now. But go ahead, say whatever you need to say. Like, so, is always in my vocabulary.
Yeah, you have way more tolerance than I do, because I know me.
I have kids now, so like now the energy is completely depleted to fight on any big level. I walk away going, I know I'm right. I don't have to worry about it. I just walk away.
I have a problem not walking away, and so that's an issue. So yeah, I would be dead. So I fully. Last category is always Patrick, and we close out with Late Night with the Devil with this question, which is the most important question, which is it scary? So at the end of the day, Late Night with the Devil, is it scary?
I would say, like, I don't think it is. But I also think it's like, I think it scares a certain subset of fans, maybe the fans that really, really are ravenous about found footage. This might actually like hit that nerve for them. But I didn't, both viewings, I was never like, this is a really dread-inducing movie. I wasn't worried about what was it didn't get me under my skin that way. And for the most part, I was just kind of enjoying all the little tricks and stuff that go out. There's a lot of great technical elements in these movies that I could enjoy, but I'm not saying that there wasn't dread in this movie, but it wasn't that kind of dread. The kind of dread where I'm worried about what's going to happen. I didn't have that this time around.
I'll disagree and say that I think this is a great scary movie in the same way that I would say that like a lot of my favorite slashers are great movies. When I watch, as I'm wearing the t-shirt for Halloween, or when I watch Nightmare on Elm Street, or when I watch any of the Friday the 13th movies, those movies never scare me, but I love the horror of them, if that makes sense. I love the kill scenes. I love the great Freddy lines, or the Jason kills, or whatever. I think Late Night with the Devil is very much that, where I just love the escalating tension. I love the underlying sense of dread. I love the idea of something's going to go wrong, and at the beginning you're not quite sure what. Because again, walking in, my impression was this was a movie about a film. This was a movie about a TV show that filmed a live exorcism. That's what I thought this was. I had no idea that's not what it was until literally I got in the theater. And I appreciated that because it surprised me. It subverted my expectations for what I thought it was going to be in the best way possible. And it ticked every box of what I want out of a horror film. It had great suspense. It had great characters. It had a really fun story. It had great originality. And I love the genre, meaning the genre of a TV or a movie about the TV and film industry, which I've already said. I admit I'm a little biased because I love TV and films about the TV and film industry. I fully admit I'm biased in that way. But I also love religious horror films. I've been weirdly odd about that. I'm an atheist who loves religious horror films. Makes no sense. I understand that. But I just appreciate the fiction of it all. I love great possession movies. Talk to Me was great. I love The Exorcist. And it just ticked all the boxes of what Damon looks for in a horror film. And when I left this, so little behind the scenes footage, I don't want to give this away too much, but you had seen this last year. We talked about it earlier in the show. I won't say exactly what you told me when you said about this movie, but the impression I got was you were not the biggest fan of this movie. You were not like, oh my God, you were going to be blown away by this film. Talk to Me was a film you had seen before me, and then we saw it again together at Comic-Con, and you're like, I really liked it. You didn't tell me anything about it. You just said, I really liked Talk to Me. Late Night with the Devil, you're like, it didn't work for me. You didn't tell me any details, didn't tell me why, it didn't work for me. I left and I was like, God, man, this really worked for me. This was great. So again, this is just, this is one of those rare episodes where we just disagree on the totality of a film. This is everything I want in a horror film. It checked all the boxes, ticked all the boxes for me. And as I said, up to this point, as of this recording, when this episode drops on April 16th, going into April 17th, this is my favorite horror movie to this point in the year.
Uh-huh. No, I'm fucking with you, Damon. Listen, you like what you like, and I want people to see this movie. Don't get it twisted. My opinion is my opinion alone. I think it has a lot of strengths. I think it had a lot of things that didn't get me, and it didn't get the people that I happened to be sitting with by chance in the audience both times I saw it. That's just by chance. You know what I mean? That's my own little tiny anecdotal bubble. That's all I got. All I got's my opinion. At the end of the day, I hope you enjoy this movie as much as Damon or more. And I bet it's going to be on a lot of lists at the end of the year as people's number one, number two, top five, whatever. I have a good feeling that's going to be the most people's opinions about this movie. It just happens to not be my opinion about this movie.
Late Night with the Devil is available in theaters now, and it drops on Shudder on Friday, April 19th. So you can check it out if you have streaming through Shudder. Or again, as I always recommend, if you can get to the theater, to me it's worthwhile. Go check it out in the theater. We always say, even if we don't love a horror movie, the theater experience is one that I always recommend. So go check it out. Late Night with the Devil is available now. Thank you, as always, for everyone that tunes into the show. Make sure you check us out on all of your favorite podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and, of course, over on our YouTube channel, just search Rewind of the Living Dead. Please subscribe over there. It means a lot, helps us in terms of our views and our counts and our availability on there. So please subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you got questions, comments, movies you'd like us to review, you want to tell Patrick how he's so wrong about Late Night with the Devil, hit us up on social media. Find us anywhere at Rewind of the Living Dead on Twitter/X, Facebook, and Instagram. Send us messages, or you can send us an email at rotlivingdead@gmail.com. That's rotlivingdead@gmail.com, or you can also find us on our own personal social media channels. I am at Damon Martin, and you are?
At Director Patrick.
And a big thank you, as always, for everyone that tunes into the show. We will be back next week with another edition of Rewind of the Living Dead. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you then.